Hello there. You are welcome to HisGov TV. You are welcome to our WAEC Chief Examiners Report series. So I'm doing a series of videos where I am educating students as well as teachers of some of the petty mistakes that students make in their Wassce exams. And so we have done history, and this is the second of the series. And today we are going to look at social studies. So I'm doing this series in order to educate students and also to inform teachers about what WAEC examiners are saying about the conduct of our students with regards to the writing of the Wassce paper. Some of the mistakes that they make in the examination room, all of them have been compiled by a WAEC, and I am glad to share them with you. Good. So today we are looking at Social Studies Paper 2. So let's begin with the first one. If you also want to check on other subjects, you can check in our playlist. I have a whole playlist for that, and I'll be doing various subjects as well. So you can check in if your subject has been done in the playlist on the page. So we are looking at social studies. So one, standard of the paper. So let's take a look at the standard of the paper. The standard of the paper compared with that of the previous years. The overall performance of the candidate was lower than that of the previous year. Now, this year is 2020. So this is the Chief Examiner's report 2020. And according to WAEC, the performance of students in 2020 was lower as compared to 2029. All right, good. So let's move on let's take a look at the summary of candidates' strength. So the candidate's strength has to do with what the candidates did well in the examination room. And so they are being commended for. And also those who are also about to write are also encouraged to do same. One, a majority of the candidates adhered to the rubrics of the paper. So the rubrics had to do with do not write in this margin, answer only 2 questions. So the instructions around the paper is what we termed as the rubrics. And according to the WAEC examination board or chief examiners, students adhered to them. Again, too, most candidates answered questions on the following topics well. They provided the correct points required and explained them. So these are the topics that students really did well in answering questions on them. These topics has to do with one, the social, of course, socio-cultural practices, of course, that promote societal development. 2, agencies responsible for the socialization of the child. 3, sources of conflict in the Ghanaian society. And then 4, names of financial institutions operating Ghana and the benefits of financial security to the individual. Good. So let's take and look at the weaknesses. Now that we know the strength of students, let's take a look at the weaknesses of students, which is very, very important. Now, one, some of the candidates had difficulty with the spelling of some technical words. So some of the technical words were not spelled well by students, and therefore students are encouraged to be careful with such words. 2, some candidates had difficulty in answering questions on the following topics, and they could not provide all the right points and explain them. 1, the usefulness of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, how Ghanaians misconstrued the implication of independence, as well as ways of developing human resources for national development. So these topics were students' weaknesses. And so ask yourself, if you're a student, are you good in answering questions around these topics? And also, if you're a teacher, ask yourself, would your students be able to answer? Would they be confident enough to answer questions around these topics? And so if you're a teacher, I believe you should take a notice and make them aware. Now, let's take a look at the suggested remedies that these examiners want teachers and students to do. One, candidates must read the recommended textbooks to be familiar with literature and vocabulary of the subjects. And then also two, tutors must ensure that candidates study all the topics in the social studies syllabus and gain a mastery of the content before they sit for the paper. Yes, some candidates, some teachers are not able to teach all that is required of the syllabus, and so students find it very difficult to answer some of these questions. So now let's take a look at the detailed comment, and these detailed comments are going to take the questions one after the other. This is the 2020 Wassce questions, one after the other, and how students perform in each of the question. That's what we're going to look at. Let's take a look at question number one. So the question number one says, discuss 5 ways in which Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs is useful to the individual. So how is the Maslow's of course, hierarchy of needs of course, useful? How is it important to the individual? Let's take a look at students' performance on that. Candidates were required to discuss 5 ways in which Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory is useful to the individual. Many candidates did not understand the question. They outlined the hierarchy and explained what each need on the hierarchy means. Some also presented a well-labeled pyramid of the hierarchy of needs as the answer to the question. You understand? So you see, students, instead of focusing on the importance, so this question was asking on the importance of what the Abraham Maslow's needs of theory. How is it important to the individual? How can the individual inculcate it in his life, everyday life? That is what the question was demanding. But students presented the pyramid, of course, the hierarchy, the Maslow's, of course, hierarchy in that order, without telling the examiner the importance of that hierarchy to the person or the individual, because the question was asking for the importance of that to the individual, not to present the hierarchy. They could not, however, establish the relevance of the theory to the individual. That is, the attainment of lower needs will lead to the achievement of the higher ones. For instance, the individual will have to satisfy the basic needs of the body, food, clothing, shelter, etc., before aspiring to attain higher needs of self-actualization. Performance of candidates on this question was not good enough, as they scored very low marks. And so it is for something that teachers should take a notice of, as well as students, that you do the right thing. Let's look at for question number 2. It says, explain the term reproductive right. And then B also says, list 4 responsible behaviors of the adolescent. And then C says, explain 4 ways of fostering good gender relations in the society. Let's look at candidates' performance. A good number of candidates attempted this question and performed fairly on it. On the part A, most of them provided a good explanation of the concept of reproductive right and scored the maximum marks. However, some of the candidates deviated and wrote on reproductive health, scoring low marks. All right. Now, the B part of the question required candidates to list 4 responsible behaviors of the adolescent. Candidates provided good response for this question and scored maximum marks. Good. Candidates also found it challenging to provide the required answers to part C of the question. Some of the wrong answers provided by candidates included protection of state, a report, of course, criminals to the police. The majority of the candidates performed poorly on this question. Some correct response candidates could have considered as an answer include the following. So the question was what? Explain 4 ways of fostering good gender relations in the society, and you see what students were writing. So this is what WAEC required of you as a student: ensuring equal say in decision making for everyone, a removal of discrimination against women, sharing of responsibilities fairly, enforcing laws on violence against women, and also promotion of education of women. And this is what for WAEC was expecting students to write on these here ways 4 ways to foster good gender relations in the society. Good. So let's look at the question number 3. Now, enumerate 4 sociocultural practices that promote societal development. And then the 2 also says justify 4 reasons for which funeral rites are instituted and performed in the Ghanaian traditional society. Now, this question was in 2 parts, A and B, and candidates were required to answer both parts. The part A tasked candidates to enumerate 4 sociocultural practices that promote societal development. This was well done by a majority of the candidates who attempted the question, and they scored good marks. And I hope that one is quite cheap, easier. For the part B, the candidates were to justify 4 reasons for which funeral rites are instituted and performed in the Ghanaian traditional society. Majority of the candidates answered this question well. Unfortunately, few candidates did not understand the question and gave wrong answers about how to reduce funeral expenses. This led to loss of some marks. Now, these were some of the correct points that the WAEC was expecting students to provide. To encourage good moral and social life through remarks, comments, songs, and dirges performed during the ceremonies. So when somebody dies, you see they perform ceremonies. For some of them will come and say good things about the person. So it is done to encourage people to also live a good life, to provide a period of reconciliation with the dead person. This will enable the dead to have a rest, yes, to serve as a means of giving or showing last for respect or honor to the dead. Performance of candidates on this question was good. So these are some of the reasons why it is important for us to have a funeral for the dead. Let's take a look at the question number 4. Enumerate 4 agencies responsible for the socialization of the child. Discuss 4 challenges inherent in the socialization process of the child. Now, this question was in 2 parts, A and B again. We're required to answer both. The part A also required candidates to enumerate 4 agencies responsible for the socialization of the child. Many of the candidates did well and scored a maximum marks. Some candidates rather wrote on agents and lost marks for the deviation. So agencies, we have agencies and what? Agents of socialization. And some students could not distinguish between the 2 of them. For the part B, candidates were to discuss 4 challenges inherent in the socialization process of the child. Majority of the candidates who answered the question provided the correct answers and scored appreciable marks. Very few candidates who did not understand the question wrote on the processes of socialization, and others wrote on the role of agencies of socialization. Wow. So this is what some students wrote. Let's take a look at the responses that WAEC was demanded from students. 1, we had some correct response these candidates could have provided were we have financial problems, we have immoral behaviors of some parents and family members, influence of bad peer groups, that's gangster, drug addict, and co., and also negative influence of people living in slums or in the neighborhood, gambling and immoral life practices. Good. Let's take a look at the question number 5. Examine 5 ways in which Ghanaians misconstrue the implication of independence. And this was the question that, according to WAEC, a lot of students were not able to answer properly. This was a straightforward question that required candidates to examine 5 ways in which Ghanaians misconstrue the implication of independence. Very few candidates answered this question and performed poorly. They did not understand the question. Candidates wrote on the benefits of independence, why Ghana is not developing, and problems of development, among others. These deviations led to loss of substantial marks. So 5 ways in which Ghanaians misconstrue the implication of independence, and students were writing the importance of independence and a whole lot. The question is about how Ghanaians misunderstood the implication of the independence they gain, and hence do not put in much effort to develop the nation. The candidates could have also considered some of the following points. So these were some of the points that WAEC was asking for. Lack of awareness that independence entails depending on one's own ability, knowledge, attitude, and character to make it meaningful. 2, Ghanaians also wrongly associate independence with wealth or affluence and comfort of life. They think that with independence, everything will flow. Yeah. And then also 3, leaders love political power and use it for their political and personal interests instead of using power to give freedom to the people. Ghanaians think that independence calls for a laissez-faire attitude to work instead of disciplined attitude to work. So these are some of the misconstrued implications or ideas that some Ghanaians had about independence. Let's take a look at, of course, question number 6. List 5 sources of conflict in the Ghanaian society, and also describe 5 processes you will employ to build peace in your community. Now, this question was in 2 parts, A and B. Our candidates were expected to answer both parts. The A part tasked, of course, the candidates to list 5 sources of conflict in the Ghanaian society. The part A was well answered, and the candidates and most candidates scored the maximum marks. The B part tasks candidates to describe 5 processes they will employ to build peace in their community. And candidates mixed up answers to this question. They provided some correct points on the processes or the ways by which peace is built in the community and explained them. Then also some added points on prevention of conflicts and causes of conflict. These points were not correct and led to loss of some marks. These candidates could have considered the following points. So compromise, mediation, negotiation, right conduct, adjudication, and also a respect for human rights. These were some of the points that WAEC was expecting students to write about. Let's move on to the question number 7. Explain the term responsibility and give 2 examples. Highlight 5 possible conflict that can arise in the exercise of an individual's rights and responsibility. Now, this question was also in 2 parts. The part A required for candidates to explain the term responsibility. Few candidates answered this question, and they did well in the explanation of the concept of responsibility. They were also able to provide the required number of examples and scored higher marks. Now, for candidates, we're also required to highlight 5 possible conflicts that can arise in the exercise of an individual's right and responsibility for the part B. Now, it involves the obligation of the individual to perform his or her duties, even if his or her rights are not fully met. Very few candidates made some acceptable efforts to provide the correct points and explain them. They scored very good marks. Majority of the candidates could not comprehend the import of the question. So understanding the question is very, very key. Make sure you understand the question well before you start to answer. They deviated in their answers and wrote on the sources of conflict. Can you imagine? Some of the candidates also wrote on conflicts that would arise out of the refusal of the individual to perform a responsibility. Now, some of the answers that WAEC was expecting students to write was undertaking of national service in remote areas without social amenities, payment of development levy in area where there are no social amenities, of course, such as schools and other things, and also payment of school fees, even when there are no for teachers, and then also payment of electricity bills in areas which have low current renders. Good. So the H1 was list any 4 financial institutions operating in Ghana. Explain for a benefit of a financial security to the individual. And these were some of the points that WAEC was also expecting students to raise. Savings yield interest on money saved. It helps to meet unexpected expenses. It helps the individual to maintain good living standard. It enables the individual to spend for money wisely and all. Overall performance on this question was good. Let's look at the last one, and then we bring our discussions to an end. So discuss 5 ways by which human resources can be developed in Ghana for the promotion of national development. This was also a straightforward question, and candidates were to answer. A good number of candidates did well by stating the points correctly. They scored average marks. Now, these were some of the points that WAEC expected students to also raise with regards to that question. All right. And then the last question, discuss 5 ways by which you can ensure sustainability in your personal life. And these were some of the these were some of the answers or points that WAEC was also expecting students to make. Good. So we've had a good discussion. Because my battery was running low, I had to skip some of them. But hey, we've had a good discussion, and I wish you well in your Wassce exams. Subscribe to the channel and also recommend to your friends. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Flesh among equals.